Hey there, Aaron Wills again, bringing you another reaction video. I started this on Friday, the 6th day of September in 2024 at 10:10 p.m. Along with welcoming you to my channel, allow me to thank you for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe before sharing this video and turning the post notification bell on. We're going to go to youtube.com and hopefully find a writing video. I want to look up underwriting versus overwriting. I'm what they call an underwriter, which basically means I'm someone that struggles to develop a big word count. Let's see why for youtube.com. Oh, it didn't work out. Why I didn't click on the search bar. Here we go. youtube.com. Excuse me. Enter. Excuse me for that. I'm going to look up underwriter versus overwriter. See what we come up with. Here we go. I'm putting underwriters versus overwriters. Here it is. I typed it in earlier and didn't get nothing. Let's see what we got now. I got a couple videos, but they didn't show up. I already tried to do an action video, a reaction video, just before I did this video, and I couldn't get anything to come up. There we go. There we go. It says editing word count to fix for both underwriters and overwriters. Ooh, that's the chick from Reezy. That's the Reezy chick.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Strayed.
Marlon James.
Anne Lamott. Kimmy Nick the Pill.
Mark Matusik.
Jen Pashtola.
Gay Hendricks.
Jacob Norby.
Rima Zaman. Amy McNee. Heather Ash Mara. Katie Hendricks.
Cole Arthur Riley.
Dr. Judah.
Hey everyone, it's Shaylin, and I'm here today with another writing video. Today I wanted to talk about underwriting and overwriting, and this is going to be kind of part discussion about how these terms are used in the writing community, because they're kind of used in ways that I don't think are very beneficial, and part advice discussion type thing. I think there's a much better way of looking at your book's word count, affecting and changing and editing your book's word count. So if you're in the writing community, you've probably heard these terms before. Underwriter and overwriter, they've been floating around for as long as I've been in the writing community. Most people are probably familiar with them. If you're not familiar with them, underwriters are people who would typically underwrite their first drafts, so their first drafts are too short, and overwriters would be those whose first drafts would be too long. I always consider myself an underwriter. I'm not like drastically an underwriter, but usually my first drafts are just a little shorter than they need to be. Like for a novel, maybe 10,000 words shorter than they have to be. My hope is to kind of talk about this topic in a more complex and hopefully helpful way, because I think these terms are very oversimplified within the writing community, and it can be kind of problematic for their processes, and it can aggravate other issues. I do think knowing your tendencies is great. It is great to know if you tend to underwrite or overwrite or whatever. I really think knowing your tendencies in any way, knowing what mistakes you tend to make is so helpful. Even if you keep making them because you struggle not to, being self-aware is the best thing. But I do think that this issue is much more complicated than being straight up an underwriter or an overwriter. So now I just wanted to talk about how I personally look at this topic, because I think it's a much more effective way of actually editing your word count to be where you need it to be, and where the story needs it to be. Getting it to the right word count so that it's more publishable, so it's more readable, and also so that your story is stronger. So the way I like to see it is that a book has multiple planes or levels, and on each individual plane you want to consider whether you tend to underwrite or overwrite, but keep in mind that your tendency doesn't mean you will always do so. So the first level is the plot level. The question here is, do I have the right number of scenes in my plot? So if you don't have enough scenes in your plot, your story won't be set up, developed, or concluded, or maybe all.
What if you don't plot like me? But I do, I don't know. I don't plot. I'm just a pantser. I'm an underwriting pantser.
All three in a way that is sufficient enough. Whereas on the other hand, if you have too many scenes, then you're going to have extraneous scenes, scenes that don't serve the plot at all, scenes that are repetitive, or, using multiple scenes to get across the same point when they could be condensed into one. Basically, you just have more content than is necessary to tell the story most effectively. Level 2 is the scene level, and this is how many beats you have in a scene. A beat is a little hard to describe, but it's basically a thing that happens. If you think of your scene as a ladder, a beat is all the individual rungs. A beat might be a paragraph, several paragraphs, or a small segment of dialogue. If there are a bunch of little things that happen to advance your scene for its full purpose at the end, each beat is one of those little advancements. It's just like a step. Too few beats means that your scene will feel thin and underwritten. There won't be enough development to support the purpose of the scene, it might be lacking in descriptive beats, narrative beats, or the dialogue might progress too quickly or be underwritten. Too many will probably mean your scene will be oversaturated and move too slowly. It will meander and take too long to get to its point. There will be extra beats that don't contribute to the purpose of the scene, maybe too many descriptive beats or too many narrative beats, or the dialogue will just meander and go on way longer than it has to. The level after that would be the beat level, and the question here is, do I have the right number of sentences in a beat? So we've already decided if we have the right number of beats in a scene. Now what we want to look at is if the beats themselves are too long. You might have all the beats you need, but they might not be fleshed out enough, or they might be fleshed out too much. For example, you could have a descriptive beat that's just like way too brief and doesn't adequately describe whatever it is you're describing, or you could have one that goes on way too long. And then the final level, level 4, is the sentence level. And the question here is, do I have the right number of words in my sentences? I think it is very rare to have an underwriter on this level. I think most people are overwriters on the sentence level because most people, when they draft, are going to be wordy, are going to have extra words they don't need, weasel words, filters, weak adjectives, all that kind of stuff. This doesn't mean that sometimes you don't need to add a word, but most people, as their general tendency, will have too many words in a sentence. So now I'm going to break this down with an example, and I'm just going to use myself because that's the easiest. So I'm kind of generally an underwriter. I always considered myself an underwriter, but it's a little more complicated if we look at
I'd like to use you too.
it.
I knew I was underwater. I just didn't realize I was this underwater. If you're
through this model. So on the plot level, yes, I am an underwriter. I'm usually missing a couple scenes, but that doesn't mean that I'm only missing scenes. In this one book that I wrote particularly, I had a real problem with having extraneous scenes near the beginning because there was this one part of the setup, it was a fantasy book, and I really felt like when I was outlining it, like it was going to take multiple scenes to set this up with all the world building, with all the characters, but then when I actually wrote it, I literally could have done it in one scene instead of like 4 or 5. And so for that area of the plot for this one storyline, the story was actually really overwritten. There were like literally 4 or 5 scenes when I could have done it with one. It's because I didn't think that I would be able to do it with one. I didn't trust that I would be able to do it with one. But the book was still underwritten in other ways. I mean, it wasn't like it was a short book. The first draft was like 115,000 words, so it's not like it was a short book. But it was still missing scenes. Generally, I'm going to need to add more scenes, and I'm going to need to delete. On the scene level, I'm also usually an underwriter. I'm usually missing beats, especially in dialogue. My conversations usually go way too fast. Like I said, it's like a ladder, and there's not enough rungs. On the beat level, I'm kind of both. Sometimes I have to add a lot of description, like usually the first time I go through a draft, I'm adding a lot of description, but there will still be places where I will really over-describe. I'm honestly both here. Maybe more of an overwriter. It kind of depends. I like underwrite and then I overwrite. I'm both, honestly. And then on the sentence level, I definitely consider myself an overwriter. When I'm editing, my focus is on streamlining my sentences as much as possible, not adding words to the sentences, removing words. Yes, sometimes I might add a word to a sentence, but generally I'm going to have some extra stuff that I want to cut. So when editing a book, in order to kind of fix up your word count, because most people aren't going to be right where they need to be, I think it's important to consider each level individually and generally start at the first level and work your way to the most specific. So if you overwrote a book and you really need to cut some words, you would start at the plot level, delete all the scenes that you need to delete, then delete all the beats you need to delete within individual scenes, then all the sentences within individual beats, finally line edit and cut all the words you don't need. You can cut a lot of words just by cutting individual words and not affecting the content of the book at all. And I think it's really important to look at your book this way, because if you apply this single issue to yourself, I am an underwriter, it can cause you to overlook other problems. So like I said, I'm an underwriter, but there are still scenes I have to cut. I'll be like, I know I need to cut this scene, but it's hard because it's doing the opposite of what I'm trying to do. My book's too short, I'm trying to make it longer. That doesn't mean, just because my book needs to be longer doesn't make this scene magically necessary. Still an unnecessary scene that needs to get kicked to the curb.
I got something that needs to be longer, and I ain't no book.
By choosing to keep the scene just to make my word count longer, I'm favoring word count over the book's quality. I've read books in the fantasy genre, especially. I use the fantasy because of the world building aspect, which is so prevalent in all genres, but especially in fantasy. Where, like, the plot was way too long. Fantasy books in general, it's more acceptable to have long books, so they can go so long. And I was like, wow, there's so much random content in here that I don't need, that's not progressing the plot, but yet there's, like, no world building. And it's kind of, feel like, the case of a writer who's like, I'm an overwriter, I need to cut, my book is way too long. So they only cut, and they don't realize that they're really lacking in other areas. The character development is thin, there's no world building. Yeah, they need to take stuff away because there's random stuff in the plot that doesn't need to be there. But they also need to add more stuff. If you get too set in the mindset of one thing that you're an underwriter or an overwriter, you can really miss problems in your book because you think that those flaws don't apply to you. I remember getting a comment once, I don't remember what video this was on, I think it was on my video of line editing my own work, I don't remember exactly, but I remember getting this comment and it really like identified with the comment because the person was saying, I'm an underwriter and I underwrite my books really badly, like they're way too short. But I find it so hard to line edit because it's like every time I cut a word, I'm like, no, like I don't want to cut words. And it can be really hard, and I really related to that. It was like, I don't want to cut these words because I actually need more words to get my book where I want it to be ideally publishable, to be at a publishable length. But it doesn't mean that my book shouldn't be line edited to be as streamlined as possible in that manner too. Like most things related to writing, this is really circumstantial. It depends on the author, it depends on the work, it depends on the specific area of the work, it depends on the scene, it depends on the sentence. That's everything I wanted to say on the underwriter overwriter thing and how I would recommend approaching editing your word count, because really these two issues kind of have the same fix, and it's looking at your book in a more complex but also more global.
I guess that's all there. And once again, I am definitely an underwriter, and my problem isn't in the plot, because it isn't in the outline, because I don't outline my books at all. I'm a pantser. I'm obviously an underwriting pantser. I don't know what they say about that. That's all I have to say about that. So, I'm an underwriting pantser. Maybe one day I'll look that up and see what I can do about that. See what I can do about that. I'll look it up sometime. But right now I'm done with this video. Peace!